What makes a man walk away from privilege and comforts of life to lead a war? What makes a nation rise and fall within 30 months? This is not just the story of a soldier. It is not just the story of a war. It is a story of Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, the son of a billionaire who was born into wealth and privilege, but who became a revolutionary. It is a story of the Oxford graduate who once held the fate of millions of people in his hands. His life was filled with thunder, of bombs, of applause, of betrayal, of hope. From exile to politics, from power to pariah, to legend. What you're about to hear isn't just history. It is the saga of courage, conflict, and consequences. So buckle in, because Nigeria's history cannot be told without telling the story of Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu. Born on November 4, 1933 in Zungeru, northern Nigeria, Ojukwu came into the world with everything. His father, Alois Odumegwu Ojukwu, was not just any man. He was the first Nigerian billionaire and one of the country's most successful businessmen. From transport to trading, Alois built an empire during colonial rule and held a seat on the board of multiple companies. It was expected that his son would naturally inherit the family fortune and keep the business legacy alive. But young Chukwuemeka had different ideas. He began his formal education at King's College, Lagos, one of the most elite schools at the time. After secondary school, he was sent abroad to the University of Oxford in England, where he studied modern history at Lincoln College. His time in the United Kingdom exposed him to global politics, African liberation struggles, and the harsh realities of colonialism. He returned home with not just a degree, but a fire in his belly to help shape Nigeria's future. Yet again, Ojukwu defied expectations. Rather than sit in an air-conditioned office managing his father's empire, he joined the Nigerian Army in 1957, one of the first university graduates to do so at the time. At that time, most officers were either British or from humble backgrounds. Rich kids were not in the military. A man of Ojukwu's wealth and pedigree was expected to lead a boardroom, not a battalion. For Chukwuemeka Ojukwu, duty was louder than comfort. His entry into the army wasn't smooth. As an Igbo man in a military structure still heavily influenced by British colonial command, and later the dominance of some of his countrymen from the majority tribe, he constantly had to prove himself. But Ojukwu was no ordinary soldier. He was strategic, articulate, and fiercely patriotic. Over time, he rose through the ranks, becoming one of the most educated and outspoken officers in the Nigerian army. By the time Nigeria gained independence in 1960, Ojukwu had positioned himself as more than just a soldier. He was a thinker, a potential leader, and a man who would not flinch from hard decisions. Nobody, absolutely nobody, could have predicted just how far that determination would take him. In a few short years, the young man who was born in Zungeru in present-day Niger State would find himself at the center of a national storm, leading a region to secede from Nigeria and going down in history as the face of one of Africa's most tragic conflicts. The stage was set. By the early 1960s, Nigeria was freshly independent, but already falling apart. There were ethnic tensions, political rivalry, and corruption boiling beneath the surface. The young country had just witnessed its first military coup on January 15, 1966, a coup that shook the foundations of the Nigerian state. The coup led by Major Chukwuemeka Kaduna targeted top political and military leaders, mainly from the north and from the west. Several prominent figures were assassinated, including Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa Ahmadu Bello, Premier of the Northern Region, and Samuel Akintola, Premier of the Western Region. Then President Nnamdi Azikiwe and General Ironsi were not touched. Azikiwe was out of the country on vacation. Ironsi was in a night party in Lagos and was not found at home when the soldiers invaded his residence. This stark reality led many in the north to believe the coup wasn't just political, but that it was an ethnic war. Though the coup was foiled and General Ironsi, an Igbo man, became head of state, the damage was done. Trust between Nigeria's major ethnic groups, Igbo, Hausa, and Yoruba, was shattered. The army, once seen as neutral, was now viewed as sharply divided and dangerous. Ojukwu did not participate in the coup. In fact, he played a major role in ensuring that peace returned to the northern region, protecting many northerners from retaliatory violence. He followed orders, stayed loyal to the chain of command, and upheld the unity of the country. But peace was short-lived. On July 29, 1966, another military coup, this time a counter-coup, was launched by northern soldiers. General Ironsi was captured and killed in Ibadan. The chain of command shattered and confusion reigned about who should lead next as head of state of Nigeria. Ojukwu, who believed in proper military hierarchy, argued that Brigadier Babafemi Ogundikpe, as the most senior military officer in the country at the time, should take over the reins of power. But Ogundikpe, a southerner, held no sway over the troops in the north. The soldiers only recognized Yakubu Gowon, a northern officer, even though he was younger in military rank to Ogundikpe. A power struggle erupted. Ojukwu refused to recognize Gowon as head of state of Nigeria, insisting that the military must follow its own rules. Gowon, however, quickly gained support from the north and from the west. This standoff was the first crack in what would soon become a full-blown national fracture. Behind closed doors, peace talks were attempted, the Abure Accord in Ghana being the most notable, but those agreements would later collapse. Ojukwu's loyalty to the constitution and military order was soon overshadowed by the desperate cries from the eastern region, especially the Igbo people, who felt increasingly unsafe and unwanted in Nigeria. The brutal killing of Igbo people in the north following the second military coup, the massacres of civilians that claimed tens of thousands of lives, transformed Ojukwu from a soldier trying to fix a broken system into a leader ready to break away from it. The time for diplomacy was slipping away. The road to Biafra had begun. In 1967, Nigeria was on fire. Ethnic killings in the north had turned deadly. Hundreds of thousands of Igbo people were slaughtered. Trains and trucks carried bodies back to the east. Survivors arrived in tears and in blood, bringing tales of horror. In the east, one man became the voice of his people, Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, who at the time was the military governor of the eastern region. Ojukwu had tried to stay within Nigeria. He attended peace talks and pushed for a confederation that would let each region govern itself. But every step forward was blocked or reversed. The Abure Accord signed in Ghana between Ojukwu and Gowon promised peace, regional autonomy and reconciliation. But when Nigeria's federal government returned home, they accused Ojukwu of misinterpreting what was agreed upon in Abure. Ojukwu felt disappointed and saw it as an absolute betrayal. Meanwhile, the East was boiling. People were angry, scared, and desperate. Ojukwu's military barracks became more than a command post. It became the heartbeat of a new idea, Biafra, On May 30, 1967, Ojukwu stood before microphones and in the full glare of the day and before the people of the eastern region and the press and declared as follows, quote, "We, the people of eastern Nigeria, do hereby solemnly proclaim that this territory shall henceforth be an independent sovereign state to be known as the Republic of Biafra." End of quotes. And just like that, Biafra was born, and so was war. The Nigerian government viewed Ojukwu's secession as treason. Within weeks, troops moved into the Midwest, marching towards the east. Ojukwu's Biafra, underprepared, underarmed, but fiercely determined, resisted the Nigerian troops. The Nigerian Civil War, also known as the Nigeria-Biafra War, effectively began. Unknown to many, the war would last for 30 bloody months. It would kill about 3 million people, mostly civilians, primarily from starvation and disease due to the total blockade placed on the region by Nigeria. And it would leave a scar on Nigeria and on Biafra forever. At first, Biafran troops achieved surprising victories, even pushing westward. But soon, Nigeria's surplus weapons, international support, especially from Britain and the Soviet Union, and the sea blockade turned the tide. Biafra was cut off from food, from medicine, from the world. Images of starving children with swollen bellies shocked the globe. Aid organizations rushed in. The world watched in horror as war crimes, hunger, and hopelessness became Biafra's daily reality. Ojukwu became the symbol. To Biafrans, he was a hero, standing against oppression. To the federal government, he was a stubborn rebel, putting lives at risk. Despite the suffering, Ojukwu refused to surrender, delivering defiant speeches on Biafran radio, vowing never to let his people be, quote, recolonized. But by January 1970, Biafra was crumbling. Cities fell. Soldiers surrendered. Several soldiers were killed. Things were really falling apart, and the center of Biafra could barely hold. Ojukwu, facing imminent threats to his life and possible capture, fled to Ivory Coast, where President Felix Houphouët-Boigny offered him asylum. He handed over Biafra to his deputy Philip Effiong. Philip, a soldier and combatant, had to tell himself the truth that the ammunition, the logistics, and the men to use in continuing the war was simply not there, and that continuing the war would mean exposing the already beleaguered people of Biafra to more suffering and death. Philip quickly consulted the remaining hierarchy of Biafra and took the decision to surrender Biafra to the Nigerian government. He declared the war over and surrendered at the field to Olusegun Obasanjo, Nigeria's commander of the 3rd Marine Commando, before eventually surrendering in Lagos at Dodan Barracks to Yakubu Gowon, head of state of Nigeria. Ojukwu, the Oxford-educated soldier, the man who dared to carve out a new nation, was now in exile. The dream of Biafra was crushed, but the memory would never die. Ojukwu's name was now etched into the hearts of millions, some with love, others with hate and anger, but all with unforgettable recognition. Ojukwu had left Biafra with his wife and family along with some members of the Biafran hierarchy. They left in the last flight from Uli Airstrip in Biafra. Ojukwu spent 13 years in exile, far away from the land he once fought for. In Nigeria, the country was healing, slowly and painfully. General Yakubu Gowon, now firmly in power, famously declared that there was, quote, no victor, no vanquished. Yet the scars ran deep, especially in the southeast. And still, Ojukwu's name echoed through those years. To some, he remained a traitor, the man who led the nation into war. But to others, especially among the Igbo people of eastern Nigeria, he was a martyr in exile, a potent symbol of bravery, pride, and resistance. Then in 1982, something no one expected happened. President Shehu Shagari, a civilian leader after decades of military rule, offered Ojukwu full pardon and asked him to return home from exile. Nigeria was trying to reconcile with its past, and bringing Ojukwu home was a powerful gesture. Ojukwu returned to Nigeria to a mix of cheers and controversy. Crowds welcomed him, young men and women sang, old comrades wept, but not everyone was pleased with him. The wounds of war were still fresh for many. But Ojukwu wasn't interested in hiding. He re-entered politics, first joining the National Party of Nigeria, the NPN, then later becoming a founding member of APGA, the All Progressives Grand Alliance, a party deeply rooted in Igbo interest and regional development. He ran for president multiple times, though never successfully. Even in defeat, he remained relevant. Ojukwu was no longer the rebel general. He had become a statesman, an elder, a voice that politicians still feared and respected. His speeches became less fiery, but more reflective. He spoke often about unity, justice, and memory, reminding Nigerians that history, no matter how painful, must never be erased. He married Bianca Ono, a beauty queen and lawyer decades younger than him in age, and their union became one of Nigeria's most talked about love stories. She stood by him through illness and political storms and later carried on his legacy with grace till this day. Ojukwu's health declined in the late 2000s. On November 26, 2011, he died in a London hospital at the age of 78. Nigeria paused for a moment. Presidents sent condolences. Flags were lowered in his honor. Tributes poured in, not just from the east but from across the nation. Some called him the lion that roared and bled. Others called him the man who dared too much. But everyone agreed that the man, Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, changed history and changed it forever. Today, statues of Ojukwu stand in southeastern Nigerian cities. Streets bear his name. His story is taught in schools, sometimes with pride, sometimes with pain. Whether you see him as a hero, a rebel, or a complex mix of both, one thing is clear: Nigeria cannot tell its story without the mention of the name Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu. He was a man who saw fire burning and stepped straight into it. He carried both the love and the blame. Even in death, his name sparks debates. But maybe that's what makes a figure legendary, when your story outlives your breath. Was Biafra a mistake or a message ahead of its time? Was Ojukwu a villain or a visionary? I leave this for you to answer.